So good evening, everybody. It's 6:36 p.m. We'll call the meeting to order. First order of business is present to speak. If you do have something to say, just introduce yourself, and we'd love to hear from you. Well, it looks like James has his hand up, so I'll give you the floor. Hi, James.
Hi guys, how are you? James Marshall, 46 Fisher Hill Road. I'll be brief. I can only hop on to the start of this meeting, but I am looking forward to hearing it down the road via the YouTube channel. But I just wanted to say I appreciated. I attended the Board of Ed meeting last, whatever the last date of the last Board of Ed meeting was, and was pleasantly. I was pleased to see how far along Phil's presentation related to the educational specification was, and just want to say I appreciate that effort. I do, whether you want to hear it or not, I do intend and want to send you a letter, Phil, just to with some comments, because things like that excite me, whether or not you want to hear it. So I just, it is far along. I think that's great. I was pleasantly surprised. You know, the pieces we saw were in a vacuum. So I am really excited to see, you know, the full picture and some of the makings that went into it. I would say, again, and I think I mentioned it at your last meeting, that it does feel, you know, where it's at, it would behoove us, or the, not us, it would behoove everybody on the school building committee to, you know, really reach out and get some public involvement, if only for the sake of garnering support for public buy-in, especially for items, given where the area requirements are at, especially for supportive items that may or may not be over the reimbursable limit, you know, and any of the wish list items. So, you know, I don't want to be a broken record, but I can't stress it enough, because community support is really what's going to float this project and get it through. So, with that said, guys, thank you. I appreciate hearing me, and I look forward to hearing more about your work. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I don't see any other hands up, but if you do have something to say, just take yourself off mute and introduce yourself. We're still in present to speak. Okay, anyone present to speak? Give it another second here.
Catherine, I just want to find out if either of those phone numbers that are up there, did any more board numbers?
Oh, right. Yeah, so there's a couple phone numbers here. Is anybody on the SBC committee?
I am.
Who's that? Peter?
Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. I'm kind of driving, so if you mute me, I don't know if I'll be able to unmute.
Okay. I think that must be it then. All right, let's move on to my chairperson report. So last meeting, we had created a community outreach task group. Late breaking email in the last few minutes, I did send out the meeting invite for our first meeting is going to be next Wednesday at 5, the 27th. I believe that's Wednesday. So you guys should have that in your email, the folks that had volunteered for this community outreach task group. We also discussed having a request to the Board of Finance regarding the CIP funding that we need for additional consultants. And that memo went to Mike McCoo, who is the Board of Finance chair, and that's going to be on their next agenda. We also have a proposed staff member that was submitted to the Board of Selectmen for review to be part of this committee. As everybody knows, Erica Bouchior gave her resignation and she was a staff member, and so it has to get replaced by another staff member. So I believe that's currently in review with the Board of Selectmen's office. We also received a couple FOI requests from random companies that we follow up with, of course. And that's it. That's all I have for chairperson report. We can move down to approval of meeting minutes. So we have two items here. SBC land assessment, that's a subcommittee. That meeting was held on March 14th. Is there a motion on the floor to approve those minutes? I'll make a motion to approve the land assessment subcommittee meeting minutes on March 14th.
I'll second.
Mike is going to second it. Any discussion on those meeting minutes?
Catherine, I just would like to point out, some people will notice the long date, how long ago it was. I had to go back and review the tapes, and it just got sort of out of queue in all my projects, and I apologize for it taking so long to get it back. But I did go back through and review the tape to make sure the minutes were accurate before I sent them in. So we should be able to stay up to date better in the future.
Okay, any other discussion? Does that prohibit us from voting on these minutes tonight, Mike? No.
Nope. They've been
Alright.
out to the public for way more than the minimum 24 hours.
Yeah, and I saw that you made that edit. That was made from one of our committee members. So thank you. So if there's no other discussion, let's take a vote. All in favor of approving the SBC Land Assessment Committee meeting minutes of March 14th, say aye.
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 Erica's an aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Next meeting minutes, the SBC meeting minutes of July 6th. Is there a motion on the floor to approve those minutes?
Erica will move to accept.
Okay, Erica, is there a second? Mike?
Second.
Oh, Justin. I'm gonna say Mike because I saw him first. Sorry, bud.
Okay.
And is any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Let's take a vote. All in favor of approving the SBC meeting minutes of July 6th? Say aye.
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 As an aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Okay, we'll jump down to communications. I think I already gave one of the communications I had, which was regarding the FOI request. So that's really all I had for that. We'll jump down to subcommittee reports. We have 3 subcommittees on our school building committee and communications subcommittee. Was there any meeting or any update for our committee here?
Meeting.
No meeting? Okay. Land assessment subcommittee, any update? Yeah.
Just trying to get my unmute there. The land assessment subcommittee has not met since the last regular committee meeting. However, we have been working to schedule upcoming meetings, and we're in the middle of that when this other project came up for the public outreach. So we waited to get that scheduled first.
Okay.
Because of the timeliness of getting the public outreach thing rolling. And so now that those dates are settled as of this afternoon, I will get the assessment subcommittee next dates established.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. And last subcommittee meeting, last subcommittee is the finance subcommittee. Any updates for us, Peter?
No meetings. Hello?
All right. Moving on to old business. Item A, owner's project manager, Collier's update. Scott, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I'll be brief this evening because I think the majority of what we have to report will be in items B and C on the schedule tonight. So I have been continuing to update, and I will send it to the group after this meeting, the milestone schedule. And again, a lot of this has been dependent on the meeting that Phil's going to talk about in a few moments, as far as our meeting with Office of School Grants and Construction Review, which was very successful, as well as hopefully an update on where we stand with appraisal. Again, it's been a little bit difficult. Our hands have been tied until we get an understanding of, one, cost of a potential site, and two, if in fact that site is something that the owner would like to pursue, as well as an understanding, and Phil will touch on it, as far as the existing school and those renovations. So again, we are looking at those two options, but there was some critical milestones and critical pieces of information that we're waiting for. So we're updating the schedule to try and take those into account, move things forward, as well as hopefully later in the evening, we will get the phase 1 site environmental proposals approved. With that, we will be reaching out to the potential landowner that we'll be in discussions with to see if we can get going on that work as well. And that's going to be critical as far as getting the land approved, also understanding land cost, and if there's any environmental impacts, again, that we need to budget for. So, again, we're trying to, come up with the most accurate budget estimate as we can, but there's still been some key pieces of information that I know it's been a real challenge getting the appraisal in moving some of these things forward, but I think we're finally gaining some real momentum, and we'll start to be able to really button in on a number of these items and getting some concept estimates put together.
Thank you, Scott.
Catherine?
Any discussion, Mike?
Yeah, I'll provide an update on the appraisal when we get to that agenda item.
Yep. Any discussion on the update that Scott just shared with us? All right, moving on to item B, Office of School Construction Grants and Review meeting. I'm gonna hand it over to Phil, but I just want to say that this has been a long-awaited meeting that we wanted to get in front of the OSCGR, which is the organization at the state that grants money to projects. And we had a very good call today. And with that, I will turn it over to Phil to give us a summary.
Thanks. So Scott, Catherine, and I met today with the Office of School Construction Grants and Review. When we say the office, this initial kickoff meeting was with Michelle Dixon, Tom Rawl, and Bob Selmer. And it's really a meeting just to get some background information out to them, ask some questions, find out what questions they have. So I started the meeting with just a generic background of where we're at, looking at a pre-K through 8th grade school, in basically blending into one building. Shared that we're looking at either a new school on a new site or a renovation of Hall School. Those were the two things that we shared. They asked some questions that were, about the age of the building. We shared that information. She asked, Michelle Dixon asked about some of the mechanical things, just the background of the buildings. They did actually ask about the roof projects because they remembered us talking, working with them on that. And then, I reminded them that they were canceled. Some of the highlights that were shared by Michelle. One of the things that she shared was that she thought the construction timelines, really thinking about a renovation of Hall School versus a new school, that the renovation would be longer. I think we knew that. she talked about the site logistics being difficult in the existing site, just because it's, and I think Scott said this best, it's kind of like because of the space is limited between the river and Route 32 and wetlands, it's kind of like we would be doing an urban project, but in a rural setting. I think that was a good way to put it. You know, obviously if we did a new building, we would be able to design it the way we would want to, not work within the parameters of Hall School. I did review the quick claim deed with, we had sent it to them and shared the information. And one of the things they asked us to do was to put in writing a letter to their director with the copy of the deed, the background information from the agenda today, and just the history of the school, age, population, all those things, renovations done, and just to basically get their opinion on that quick claim deed and what they would want to see if they were gonna, if we were gonna renovate Hall School, what it would take for us to, how we would need to change that deed, or if we didn't change the deed, if it would be a no-go. And so we already know, I think from the Hall Foundation, that they'd be interested in considering changing it, but we would need to hear from OSCGR their thoughts on that. The other part of the quick claim deed that was important was they asked us to get a legal opinion on how the deed was written and the meaning of it, which makes sense. And so we're just in the preliminary steps of doing that. I made a recommendation after the meeting to Catherine just to see if we want to contact an outside firm that would represent the SBC. We talked about the space standard, and you're going to hear today with the square footage, where we're at and how hard it is to have a smaller school district of 400 students and have an ed spec that meets the space standard that they have. And so we talked about the waiver that you can apply for, and they didn't have a comment either way about which project they would support. They did think that the space waiver would be easier in a renovation. However, they didn't rule it out for a new school. And really that's because they understand in a smaller school district, you need a gym. You know, we talked about an auditorium, you need a cafeteria. Well, when you only have 400 students, that eats up a lot of square footage fast. So there was an understanding of that. Either way, whether you did a space waiver for a new building or a renovation, their thought was it needs to be compelling. Your argument needs to be compelling. The final really thing that I'll highlight was about the land. We asked the question about the requirement for land, and the statement was really, if you already are on the Hall School property and you have that land there and you can make it work within the land that you have there, they would accept that, is how I understood that. The land that if you did a new school on a new site, they would reimburse up to the maximum of around that 19.4 acres. And that was based upon the number of students and the square footage. So you couldn't go, you wouldn't get reimbursement beyond that, which I think we knew at this point. So where we left it with them, we're going to work on a draft letter to Noel Petra, who's the, I think he's still interim director there. And the letter will ask about the deed. We'll give them the background information that we shared today on the school, square footage, population, all those things. They asked us to put in there that the roof projects were not done. And then they asked us to include the attorney's opinion, written opinion on what the quitclaim deed meant. So that's kind of our next step. And once we have the site appraisal and we have the information for the phase one, we would be able to have contact OSCGR again, and they would want to see that property. So that's kind of the highlight of the meeting. They asked some questions that, you know, and I think Catherine and Scott can verify. They didn't shoot any project down. They didn't support any project more than the other. But but they did say, recommend, I think, I heard them say, you should be bringing one project. When you move, you're bringing one project to referendum, not two, you're bringing one project to us. So Scott or Catherine, did I miss anything?
No, I was just gonna give a quick background on the quitclaim deed. If I think most of our committee members understand that the way the quitclaim deed is written for Hall School is that it belongs to the town as long as it's used as a school. And so that's what Phil was referring to with respect to, the language of the property and having that language modified to, to satisfy whatever OSCGR requests. But at this time, we're just seeking legal. We're going to try to seek legal counsel on feedback on what does that mean, and because the last thing we want to do is submit something that doesn't, that has a condition in its deed. And I think Scott, if you could talk about for the committee, just a reminder about what it means to have a space waiver. You could just do a quick summary of that.
Yeah, briefly, we discussed the space waiver. There's a standard formula that the state uses. And, unfortunately, and I think that they were starting to come around, because I actually had a conversation. One of the members that was in the meeting called me after on another project, and we discussed it a little further. But with a school, especially a K-8 school, where you've got a very broad student population, and where you're dealing at the middle school of specialized spaces such as science labs, things like that. When you're dealing with smaller populations of students, the space standard, which is the standard the state's been using for probably the past 25 years, is not as generous for smaller schools with smaller populations. So we discussed the opportunity of a space waiver for either a renovation project or a new project. It's a little easier on a renovation project because you can claim inefficiencies of the existing building, single loaded corridors, some of the efficient spaces that you're saddled with as far as the existing building. As far as a new building, the challenge is a little bit greater. They're still open to it. You have to justify, in essence, why you're building more than the state standard would say you should be able to build. And I think there's definitely an opportunity here for more meetings and all to discuss it further with the state. Right now, the way the state standard is for the 420 students pre-K through 8 would result in a school of just over, I believe, 57,000 square feet. And again, because you have spaces like gymnasiums, cafeteria, kitchen, administration, all of these requirements that any school needs to have, those add up to a lot of square footage. So if you had a lot more students, then all you're adding is classroom space. So that core space, which every school has and has approximately the same building areas, takes up quite a larger percentage of the state allocated space when you don't have the numbers to drive up their calculation. So we're going to continue to look at that as well, factor that into estimates when we finally get those to present to the community, as well as talking about the opportunities to maximize the state reimbursement for whichever option is selected.
Thank you, Scott. And so essentially what that would do is if the state has an allowable, let's say 58,000 square feet, like Scott said, based on their calculation, if we go over that square footage, that overage technically would not be reimbursable, but you can go for a waiver and say, please let it be reimbursable, and here's why. The other thing I thought was interesting that came out of this discussion today with OSCGR was that there's a statute that 55% of the existing building must remain to qualify as a renovation status. I know there was some discussion or some ideas about, possibly what if we got rid of or demolished more of Hall School and put more new addition near it or next to it. There is a statute that dictates what percentage of the existing building has to remain. So I thought that was interesting. Any discussion? I think that wraps up the update for the OSCGR. Was there any discussion? I did send late breaking this evening. I did send a couple documents that we used in, when the presentation with OSCGR. So you guys should have those. And it's essentially what Phil just went over.
Justin has his hand up, Catherine.
Who does? Oh, I'm sorry. Justin, go ahead. Thank you.
I just had the question on the comment around the deed. So they're just asking for us to get a lawyer to review the deed, that it is still okay as is, or are they saying that it's not okay as is?
I think the question is really, what is the legal interpretation of the deed? And the line that I see in there is if it's no longer used as a school, and my understanding is that the school and all its contents go back to the Hall Foundation. So, but that's what we need legal opinion for, to share what, our attorney thinks it means. And then the state will review it and determine what they think it means. I believe that's the plan. And if that is the plan, what would we need to change it to? If we were going to renovate that would satisfy them so that they would still allow us to get a reimbursement. That's the end game in this, is if we're going to do the renovation at Hall, that, it's reimbursable. And so we need to make sure that they agree with, and they understand what that deed is, what the legal language means, and that, they're investing all sorts of money. If they give us the money, they want to make sure they're not going to lose their investment. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and it would be treated as any other condition that's on a piece of property. So if somebody's going to invest in a piece of property, if there's any conditions in the deed, they want to know about it. And so we're just doing our due diligence and making sure that, what does this mean and how does this impact our funding request? Erica? Erica, you're on mute. I'm not sure if you're talking, but.
I think Ralph had his hand up first, so I'll let, did he already have his question answered?
No, he didn't. I can go to Ralph. Ralph?
I would go to Ralph. I will defer to Ralph first.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Erica. In looking at the documents that you sent us this afternoon, the existing facility and project information.
Yes.
Existing Hall Memorial School, academic wing edition 1955. I don't think that's correct. I started school there, I think around 1960, and there was no addition. So I don't know where that's coming from. Now, it's not to say my memory's immaculate, but I don't recall an addition at that point. I remember one being built when I think I was in 7th or 8th grade. I graduated Hall in '64.
That information came from the state website on school, and I'll have to say, Ralph, at times we have found it to have some minor discrepancies, but that information is what the state had on file for the school in the dates and the additions.
That doesn't make it correct, Scott.
Understood.
Yeah. No, we'll follow up and get it right before we distribute to the community. Anything else, Rob?
No, that's it for now.
All right, I'm going to jump to Erica and then I'll come back to you, Ann.
Thanks, Catherine. So I was pretty good with everything you said until Phil just made a comment, and I think this is probably the first time I've heard that, which was the building and all of its contents revert back to the Hall Foundation. Can you help me understand all of its contents?
Well, let me read it because I have it on.
Okay, thanks.
How about, you know what, I'm gonna share it and then I'll read it. Well, I can't share it. Phil, can you share it or just allow me to share, please?
Catherine, can I just make one comment on that? Because I have
Yeah.
some understanding of it.
Go ahead, Mike.
I believe the intent at the time that was done was because the Hall family or the Hall Foundation or whatever form it was in at the time, the Halls had not only built the building, but they had equipped it. So every single thing on the property belonged to the Halls. And so what they were saying is, we're giving it to the town for the town to use. If you stop using it, we deserve it back because we bought it. Obviously, this is where the legal interpretation will be valuable because since that time, the town has purchased all the stuff that's inside the school 4 times over.
Thank you, Mike. That actually makes much more sense to me because again, it goes to my next comment, which was going to be how important the legal interpretation is, especially if the case was that the assumption might have been then that the town might not have stayed in the school that long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Ann?
Just a quickie before, I was that other phone number, but I was unable to talk. And then my husband had to unlock the link out of a PDF. So I am now on his business computer, but so I'm here. Sorry, I'm late to appear on the screen.
No problem.
Going back to that statute about the 55%, we had talked about using that original building as the one part we would maintain of Hall School.
Yes.
What percentage is that portion of the building? Does it meet those, that statute?
And
No.
I don't have that total, but I could say that the existing Hall School and the supporting gymnasium, that portion of the 1980 edition constitutes 70%.
Okay.
Approximately of the entire, and I don't see, again, from a construction phasing standpoint, I think it would be incredibly challenging to try and rip down the gymnasium and cafeteria and keep that school operational. And you just don't have enough area to build that new without tearing down other portions of the building. So I think it's probably safe to say at this point that an approach would anticipate utilizing the original building in the 1980 gymnasium edition, and you would be fine within that parameter.
Okay, thank you.
Erica, did you have your hand is up. Did you have another question or?
No, I'm just on my phone, so I forgot to take it down.
Okay, Justin?
So my question is, we have to keep 55% of the building intact. That doesn't mean it can't be renovated though, correct?
No, that remaining portion, you would put together an application for what we call renovation status. So it would bring the remaining existing buildings up to like new standards. The architect and their engineers would certify that the building would last a minimum of 20 years. The key component here, though, to get renovation status is you have to prove to them that renovating the building with an addition would be cheaper than building new. They will not support spending more money just because you really like the old building. That's very clear. That's within the state statute. So, you have to, when you do your evaluation, you have to prove that a renovation project, and there's a whole format of information that gets submitted to the state. So, if that is the direction that's chosen, we'll be looking at that in advance to try and give the committee and the public an idea of what project costs would be for renovation and new, and if in fact that approach is viable.
Thank you.
Ralph?
I have a question for Scott regarding cost. When you say that the renovation has to be cheaper than new, are we looking at the bottom line per square foot, land plus building?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Total project cost.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Ralph. Any other questions, discussion?
Can I just piggyback on Ralph's comment? Is it,
Sure.
it's a total project cost, so like if we had to rent portable classrooms that are not reimbursable, that's still the total project cost, or no?
Good question.
Well, I mean, if that was going to throw you over the threshold, and if it's not reimbursable, I would recommend, if that was the approach the town wanted to take, you don't take the portables to the state and you fund them indirectly as a separate side project.
Okay.
The portables are not reimbursable?
They don't reimburse for temporary facilities.
Okay, thank you.
But
Any other-
can I ask a question, Catherine?
Go ahead.
They don't reimburse for the portables, but they're included in our overall cost.
Well, it depends.
If in fact it's determined that portables would be required to achieve the final goal, then yes, they would be. At this point, I think it's premature to say that portables would be. I think the thought here is that you would create an addition large enough that would create enough swing space that you could avoid portable classrooms.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing that does is push the schedule up by significant. That's all I'll say.
I've taught in a school that was being renovated and it's difficult. It's hard to, have some kind of a wall and there's all construction going on the other side of it.
Right. Any other discussion? Okay. Move on to the next item. Item 7C, appraisal for potential school site. Looks like Mike popped off. Oh, no, he's still there. Sorry, Mike. Did you want to give us a quick update on
Yes.
the appraisal? Thank you.
Yes. The paperwork process through the town's financial department was completed. Purchase order was issued. Catherine signed the agreement with the appraiser. I sent it back to the appraiser and he has confirmed he's in receipt of it. He's working on scheduling. He will notify us so that we can plan it out properly.
Perfect. Now, this appraisal, for anybody curious on the phone what it's for, we are going to utilize this appraisal as part of our estimate and analyzing what the cost would be for a piece of land for a new property. Or new site, I should say, not a property, but. Next item, or educational specs, square footage estimate. I believe Phil will be talking about this.
And I can't see you all now because I'm sharing my screen. So just Catherine, yell if you want me to stop her. So this is already a spin-off of what was shared at the Board of Education based upon their feedback. So, and I've shortened this down to simple square footage. And the square footage really comes through prior projects. Scott knows what these sizes are, and they're broken into 5 areas. And this is what creates the size to figure out, based upon the programs for the ed specs, what size building it would take to meet the programs. So this is broken into academic classrooms. It's broken into specialized rooms, special education, administrative area, and I'll go through each of these, in common areas. After that's done, you get a net program total. I know you're all dying for that, so let's just get that to that piece first. The net program total is $64,744. Scott, I updated all these, by the way. And then the service area and grossing factor are the other things. That's an additional $18,090. So based upon the programs currently, Sorry, I have to stop sharing for a minute so I can let people in. I think Catherine got muted too. You guys back in, Catherine? Catherine's back.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but
Peter, are you back? I see his name there. So
I am back, Mike. Thank you.
All right. So the square footage right now is 82,834, and you heard Scott say earlier we're eligible. What did you say, Scott? 57, about 57,000 square feet. That's where you would receive your full reimbursement. So I'm going to go through these areas now to give you a sense of what this is, and just a reminder that why is it so much? The challenge, and this is one of the things we talked about with OSCGR today, is that when you have a smaller school and you're consolidating into a pre-K through 8th grade group, it is very challenging to meet the programs. Once you need a gym and you put a full-size gym in because you need it, and you put a cafeteria in and you put the administrative spaces in, it makes it very challenging because it takes up a lot of your space already. So of the, you've already taken up, add an auditorium that's in here at 8,000 square feet. You've already added in a lot of square footage. So the classrooms, based upon the Prouda study, there's 2 classrooms, pre-K through 4th grade. So the breakdown, it's got the individual classrooms. The lower level classrooms have their own bathrooms in them. That's what we have now. It's standard. There's a storage area. There's breakout areas for each of these groups. A breakout area is simply a small space or small group activity. Yes, Catherine, I can. We lost our chair. Catherine, are you around?
Sure, it's a supply chain issue.
Mhm.
You can hear us, but she's going to try and get back in. Sorry, just hold tight a second.
Bill, while we're waiting, I have a bunch of family stuff going on. I may have to jump out. Do we still have a quorum if I leave?
Erica's still there, 3.
I'm pretty sure we do.
Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay. All right. So if I disappear, it's nothing personal. Well, it's personal.
Good. We understand. Yeah.
Can I follow up with, I'm in a similar but different boat than Mike, as we pedal alongside. Do we have anything else on this agenda, Phil, that we anticipate a vote on?
The proposal for phase 1 site environmental analysis, there's potential for a vote there.
Okay.
And then if we change our meeting format, there's 2 of us in the room today, and it's just so you all know, it's 82 degrees in here. So, and I hope you're enjoying your AC, and if you don't want to do this hybrid business, I'd very much enjoy to be in my own AC as well.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about that when we get to the agenda item. Catherine's back.
sorry about that.
All right, Catherine, let's see what if I share again, if I boot you.
Yeah.
All right, can you all see her still? Did she get booted again?
Is anybody else having problems?
No.
No.
She appears to be frozen.
Catherine, turn off your camera. See if that takes less. I wonder if your Wi-Fi is low. All right. Well, this is not her first rodeo. She's seen this, so I'm going to keep going when she jumps back in. If someone can open their participant tab and let me know if somebody jumps back in, I appreciate that. So again, these rooms have bathrooms in them. The grades 1 through 4, based upon the Crowder report, there was 2 classrooms per grade level. That made the board really nervous because that means there's no space, to go into a 3rd section for any grade level, pre-K through 4. And so they added 1 extra classroom here, and that over 44 students means that if we have 45 kids in 1 grade level, we would need 3 classrooms. And so they added the extra classroom as basically it would be used all the time anyways, but if it was needed for because of enrollment, you're not stuck. You're not having classes of 28. Okay. The 5 through 8 runs a middle school model, and the middle school model here basically shows the middle school model is an English language arts classroom, a math classroom, and then what we'll call a social studies classroom. The science is in a different area. That means there's those classrooms, there's 2 per, and that brings you 5 through 8. And then the common storage area, it's got the bathrooms in it, breakout area, and some resource area that's flex, okay? Some flex spaces, small group intervention, things like that. The specialized rooms, there's 2 science labs. Standard, that would be basically like a 5-6 and a 7-8, although the younger students could use it as well. It's got a prep room. There's a STEAM classroom. Think about that as the classroom that has the laundry, the kitchen, the stove, all that business. You've got art with storage and a kiln. You have 1 foreign language room. You have instrumental music with practice rooms. You have instrument storage. The chorus room would still be on whatever stage this is. And this is adjusted today based upon a stage and an auditorium. There'd be an intervention room. We have a small school-based health center that's for behavioral mental health. It's just an office, and then a health room. And again, all these the square footage adds up. Special education, this is based upon, again, the current population that we know through. So you've got a self-contained classroom with a bathroom. You've got a larger self-contained classroom, with the toilet room. Then you've got 4 special education classrooms that are smaller. And again, they're small group pull-out instruction. It's areas that are required for pull-out instruction. Average classroom size is 800 to 900 square feet. These are 350. You've got a small speech and language office. You've got 2 of those, really, because there's a need for elementary and middle. You have 2 offices for a psychologist and social worker. You have a school counselor office, and then OTPT movement room. They share a space, the occupational therapist and physical therapist. And I'm going to keep moving through this. The administrative area, I will note this has no superintendent area in it. My office would remain outside of this facility. So just a typical office. You've got a reception area, you've got storage for files, you've got administrative offices, conference rooms, nurses area, bathroom are in there. You've got small space for pair storage. We're talking about 50 square feet. Teachers, storage closets, small spaces. Some of the faculty toilet rooms, and those are distributed, not necessarily just in the admin area, and then the admin staff. So, curriculum director, pupil services director, things like that, principal. And then the common areas, the new, what we'll call the new wave, is a learning commons. And that learning commons, instead of having a separate library, a maker space, and then a TV studio of all 3 separate spaces, you're putting those spaces on. So you've got a 2,400 square foot space Learning Commons is it provides a little more flexibility, but that's where your library is. It's got storage. The librarian's office is connected to that. You've got a cafeteria. Cafeteria is large enough so you can hold 3 lunch waves of 150. This is an area that I will look at scheduling wise. If we did 4 lunch waves, we might be able to buy a little bit of square footage, maybe, but I haven't even broached that with Scott at this point. But again, you're buying a little bit of square footage off of 80,000 square feet. You're not saving a lot. You've got space for the kitchen and food storage and office. This is a change from and by the way, the teal is the change since the Board of Ed meeting. There's now a gym. It is not a gymatorium. The gym remains at 7,200 square feet. The Board of Ed really is looking to have an auditorium on there, seat approximately 450 plus, about 8,000 square feet. Anybody that was at the town meeting in the hot hall school gym last night, this would be a space where you could have a town meeting and actually have microphones and seating that's not bleacher space, and it's a real space. So you've got phys ed storage, interior, exterior. You've got locker rooms were added in. That was something the Board of Ed said, if you're going to have middle school sports, how do you not have locker rooms? These do not have showers. These are simply changing rooms with lockers. Gym office, you've got in that exterior area, you've got a public toilet area. Obviously, it's used during school as well, but it's connected to the gym for outside use, and then a family toilet area. There is not fluff in this, in what you see here. Again, the net, I have to move you, sorry. The net program total is 65,000 square feet, what I'm going to call it. And then you've got all of the rooms that are electrical, fire, storage, IT, the voice rooms, mechanical. Scott, this was listed at 1,000 or 3,000. I think that was an incorrect number. I put it back to 1,000 because the math added up. And then Scott, I'll let you speak to the grossing factor of what that is. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. That accounts for, as you can see in the parentheses, walls, stairs, all corridor circulation. The numbers that Phil was just presenting is net areas inside face of the wall. So if there's a classroom of 800 square feet, if you put a tape measure on it, it could measure 20 by 40 or 800 square feet. So all of the numbers that he just presented are net areas of occupiable space. But then we all recognize you've got wall area, you've got hallways, circulation. So you put in a grossing factor to account for those specific areas. And, we've looked at other schools, depending on the design, the architect, there may be some efficiencies there. It's an area where you may be able to trim a little bit off. Again, but it really depends on the type of school. A straight double loaded corridor is very efficient, but having a very long corridor may not be the aesthetic or the educational environment that you want to have. So we feel that this is a good number, looking at other projects of similar size and scale to hold at this point for a placeholder for the grossing factor.
So I'm just going to stop sharing because I can't see you all. So if you have questions about square footage, that's where the ed spec is at this time, square footage wise. What will happen is within the, sorry to let Catherine back in, within the ed spec now, behind all of those things is every one of those rooms is now, there's a page for each room and it spells out what's in that room. So I'll give you an example. Every classroom would have a Promethean board. It would have, you talk about lighting, you talk about flooring, you talk about furniture. That's what you load into the individual pages behind just the square footage. And you build that based upon your programs that you have. So what is this, what do you need in the Spanish classroom? Where we're offering Spanish as a world language, you would have that in the notes there. Welcome back, Catherine. And that will happen. That's what's taking so long. Now that I know the Board of Ed absolutely wants in the additional classroom, which I didn't have in there. I did not have the locker rooms in there. I did not have the auditorium, and that is something that they're looking for in there. I have not shown them this square footage. It's the first time they've seen the 82,000, to be honest with you. It's still a work in progress, but this is where the ed spec is this point from a square footage standpoint.
Thank you, Phil. You're not allowed to share anymore. That was very helpful. I just want to say, and you probably said it at the beginning of your review of the ed specs, but these ed specs are a consolidated approach. This includes both the schools and regardless of what we end up doing, but this is the minimum program requirements that that is needed for the program of a consolidated school.
Correct. And it's a draft. Did I say it? Draft. It is a draft currently. We're closing in on it. The other thing I'll say, because I know people are thinking it, how big is Hall School and Center School combined? They're about 93,000 square feet. So you'd be saving approximately 10,000 square feet if it went through at this time. Remember, the auditorium itself is 8,000 square feet. That's a big chunk. So gives you a picture though.
Thank you, Phil. I'm not sure who had their hand up first, Mike or Erica?
Erica did.
Okay, Erica, go ahead.
Thank you, Catherine. I'll try to keep my comments brief. So Phil, I did hear you say, and again, I know this is draft and preliminary. Our school, especially now, will only have one, and not knowing what the status of Hall School would be if there were a new facility, we would still use as our emergency shelter in town. So I did hear you say there were no locker rooms included. And the tour we saw in Tallinn, they had within a set of bathrooms, like an individual shower. Is that something that your board discussed?
Yeah, so in the actual, so there's two locker rooms built into this with no showers. The idea, did you tour Birch? You toured
Yes.
Birch. Yes. The idea in the ed spec is to have that kind of shower, a single door shower in the family space, that's the community space that's close to the gym.
Perfect. Okay, that's what I want to see. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Erica. Mike?
I'll avoid the temptation to ask a lot of questions tonight. I think, Phil, when you're ready, as soon as you can release this, at least to the board members, if not, further, so that we can take it and spend some time digesting it, then we can come back to another meeting with maybe better prepared questions. I'm going to take some time and digest it, and then I'll have my questions.
Thank you, Mike. Peter?
I have a similar question to piggyback on Mike. So, Phil, when we get the specs, as Mike suggests, to digest, will it be a two-tier spec where there's a base level of the space that we anticipate the state would approve, and then I'll call it waiver space for the additional space the ed specs are seeking? How is it being constructed?
No, you will not. So the ed spec is the Board of Ed's job is to build ed specs that meet their educational programs. And so what you see in that 82,000 square feet as of today is what they believe they need for their educational programs. And this, again, was part of the conversation today about the overage of trying to meet 57,000 square feet. We're not even in the ballpark. I don't know how you would physically do that in construction without having monstrous class sizes, because you couldn't run a middle school model, I'll tell you that right now. And when you're at 7-8, you're required to run that. You have to have those classrooms. So the answer is as of today, your reimbursement is approximately for 57,000 square feet. The overage waiver or the space waiver we won't know. Well, we can apply for, whether it's a new building or it's a renovated building, we can apply for it, but I can't guarantee. And we learned that today. They wouldn't tell us one way or another what we would get. But the ed spec as of today to meet the educational program is 82,000 square feet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Phil. Any other questions from the committee? Brianna?
Hi, I just wanted to say that line number 49 under administrative area says nurse's toilet room with shower. So there is one listed there. When Eric was talking about the emergency shelter, there's a opportunity there.
Yeah, and if I may, I just semantics, but you've got to be careful calling the building an emergency shelter. It's more a relief shelter. If you classify it as an emergency shelter, some very significant structural implications would come in, which would make it cost prohibitive or potentially even unable to achieve within the existing building from a renovation standpoint. There's a big difference between a relief shelter where people can be, go and get warmed up, get a shower, get a meal, and an emergency shelter. So I just wanted to be clear that we're not anticipating this building being an emergency shelter, but absolutely could be used as a relief shelter.
Thank you, Scott. Erica, did you have a comment about that?
No, but I'll clarify. So certainly the term that we use, and I'll touch base with our emergency management director, is emergency shelter. And so making sure that we're not necessarily using that term when it could be relief shelter.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that there's code implications. So if people were under the impression that it was going to be an emergency shelter, that triggers things in the structural code for either renovating the building or building new. And it also doesn't mean that the nomenclature is correct from how the building was originally built, but building codes have changed. Structural codes have changed. So to meet that classification, it would require some significant structural changes in investments.
Okay, thank you. I will look into that.
Thank you. Any other discussion about the ed specs? I just want to say, I know how much work goes into creating something like this. I mean, just the coordination alone of getting the right people in the room at the right time and coming up with this is a significant task. So I just want to thank Mr. Stevens and Scott from Colliers for pulling this together as quickly as they did. So with that, we can move on to the next item, new business. And item A, swing space options. This was brought up as a request for putting it on the agenda by one of our committee members. So I believe it was Peter. So Peter, this was just to start the discussion, but why don't we hear from you first? Unmute yourself.
Unmuted. I asked for it to be on the agenda because I had a lot of questions about it. The way I understood Scott describing this previously was that the swing space would be in Hall School. And I'm not understanding why, with a relatively small school population, why Center School couldn't be a very viable swing space, possibly with an addition of a portable or two. So that we would have a freer hand with either a new project or a renovation project. So that was one question I had. The second question I had was with respect to the meeting you just had, I was pleased to hear the state asking about the status of our roof projects, because it seems regardless of which path we take, reconfiguration or new, we're going to need viable roofs on our buildings for swing space and possibly other purposes. So I'm would like Scott to, I know Scott was our consultant for the roofs before it was canceled abruptly by the former Mr. Costa person at the building at state level. So I'd like to hear some feedback from Scott on that as well. And then finally, I'd like an understanding of if in fact and this is more related to the deed, but I'll throw it in here, Catherine, if you indulge me. With returning to Hall School, let's say we go new and we're returning this building, would we actually be returning a building to the Hall Foundation with a non-functional roof after having received it with a good roof 100 years ago?
Well, that'll have to be discussed in another, maybe our next meeting, Peter. All good questions. I do think it's important. This item here is a swing space options. So I'd like to open up the table to have a discussion about what are our current options. We'll start with Scott from Colliers. Scott, if you could just do a quick, brief definition of what is swing space and why do we need it? And then if you could share your suggestions of what we could utilize for swing space during construction of either a renovation or new school.
Yeah, well, yeah, again, swing space is space that you have that you can move students out of an existing building to facilitate renovations of that building. You can't renovate a room that you're living in. And we have to look at blocks and areas that can be cordoned off safely for students while maintaining egress, access to critical components, be it administration areas, PE, nurse, cafeteria and kitchen, food service, so be it. So whenever you're planning a renovation project, and again, these discussions only pertain to the renovation project. If you were building new, you wouldn't need any swing space. You'd keep the kids in their current buildings. When the new building is built, you would just move into the new structure. So it's a matter of creating the swing space and gathering as much swing space as you can, because if you can imagine, the more kids you can move out of the existing building that's going to remain, the quicker the renovation project would be. And I think that's why, currently the thought, and specifically now that the board has requested that an auditorium be included in the project, I think the only way to achieve the goal is to do a multi-story addition, where, if you recall the concept plan that we've looked at previously, instead of a single story addition, put a multi-story addition in that area and then tear down the existing academic wing, utilizing that area potentially for a future or for an auditorium space. So you'd build new, move the kids in, continue to renovate, and then tear down and finish the project. So it's a lot of dominoes and pieces that move back and forth. I think, well, I'm going to turn it over to Phil in a second to answer a couple of your questions, Peter, but I'll answer the one on the roofs. The reason that Costa killed it, and actually
Scott,
the gentleman.
Scott, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that wasn't on the agenda. So I'd like to put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Okay. Then let me turn it over to the specific question of swing space in center school. Let me let Phil answer that one.
Thank you.
So currently, every square inch of center school is being used. There's no open classroom next year. There's no open space. So that's number one. Number two is, if you are going to make larger class sizes, you're impacting staffing, number one. But number two, if you brought over, let's just say 5th grade, because I think that's what people were thinking. 5th grade operates on a totally different schedule. The staff at center school, their schedule is built. So the PE schedule is built of pre-K through 4. And we have the number of staff that we need to serve pre-K through 4. If I had a 5th grade, you would have a brand new schedule that would need to be built, and they would not be part of the middle school model anymore. That's an issue, but the bigger issue is there's just no space. Every space that Center is done. If you are going to do the portable route at Center, again, we would have to figure out staffing because it's two separate schedules. The staff that's at Hall School teaches at Hall School. They're there for, all of the unified arts staff are there for art, music, PE, library. For any of those classes, Spanish, they run those middle school hours. It's not like they could flip flop back and forth between Center and Hall. Peter, you look puzzled.
Yeah, I don't understand.
How would I run swing space using, where would I put fifth grade at Center School if every room is full?
So we have approximately 20 to 22 classrooms in Center School.
I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but every single space, whether it's special education for pull-out instruction or general ed classrooms, every single room is a classroom. It's not storage, it's not something else. Spanish is on a cart next year. Music and art are a shared space. PE has the gym. Libraries in the library. I mean, to buy spaces, you would have to do something drastic. You'd have to get portables at Center School, and you'd have to rewrite your schedules, and you'd have to adjust your staff to be able to bring them over and make sure that there was enough time and schedules to do that. And I'm not sure it's feasible.
Well, and I think, if I might as well, because of the special programs and stuff associated with the middle school, I mean, you're talking about taking 50 kids out, but there's a lot of different programs that those 50 kids in fifth grade, as far as a middle school model, are taking academically each day. So all of those spaces would still be required to meet the requirements of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, science labs and other things. So just because you're reducing it, it's not like at the lower elementaries where you have a home room and the kids really don't move classroom to classroom, they stay put all day. So if you could move, 2 grades out of Center School, you're freeing up that space that could be renovated. In regards to a middle school model where the students they don't have a homeroom that they stay in all day, and that they're going from different classes programmatically, just taking one grade level out really wouldn't affect the dynamic of the need in the spaces you have to maintain to keep that educational model functioning.
Thank you, Scott. Maybe we can hear from some of the other committee members as to if there were any other options for swing space, some ideas that people might have. And we've talked about a couple already, one portables, the other one being the addition, creating an addition first, and then moving kids from Hall into the addition so that we could renovate Hall. The only downfall with that option is the extended schedule. You have to build the addition first, a year, 2 years maybe, and then you do the move, and then you renovate for another year and a half, whatever the construction schedule is.
You'd have to have, Catherine, you'd have to have an entrance to that side of the building too, through the soccer field. That was just a construction entrance. I don't know how you would have any field space.
Right.
You'd have to have separation for construction and education purposes.
Any other options that people have thought about for swing space?
Ralph's got his hand up.
Ralph?
I had brought this up a while back. My understanding fifth grade was not on a middle school format. They had one classroom for the entire day. Is that still correct?
That is incorrect. 5, 6, 7, 8 is on a middle school model.
So they do change classes.
Absolutely. Yes.
That disagrees with something I was told a while back.
Any other comments? Thank you, Ralph. Peter?
Could we consider other space the town has available? For example, at one time, the kindergarten was housed in the firehouse next door to the center school. Could that space be utilized? Could some of the spacious areas we have in the library that are very underutilized right now be also used for swing space, as well as the old senior center where Phil is parked right now, where there's a fair amount of space? Could we look at those spaces? Scott, is it uncommon for towns to leverage their resources during a building period?
Well, again, I think it's really more of an educational issue as far as programmatically, from a teaching standpoint, being able to run the program, the middle school model. I don't see, and again, I would defer to Phil, how a school can function if you're breaking the school components or classes out into 2, 3, 4 separate buildings. I don't see that being successful outside of the standpoint of trying to outfit all of those spaces on a temporary basis to be, to work academically and provide egress, provide support to athletic facilities, everything else that you would need, cafeteria, food service, as well as, working as a middle school model. I don't see how that could be achieved academically.
Peter, if it was right next door, because the building we're talking about renovating is hall, not center. If it were center, I would think, we'd be having a conversation with Willington Hill Firehouse and looking at the firehouse and what I call the fire church, whatever that you want to call that building across the street that they bought. You would have that conversation at Hall School. I don't know there's no other building right there that wouldn't require transportation.
Right.
You would have to transport off site and educationally, I have no idea how you would provide your unified arts classes. You'd be transporting out to lunch. You'd be transporting out for recess for any of the unified arts classes. I'm not sure that would be a feasible option.
Any other thoughts? Brianna?
With Peter's idea about using other buildings, a couple other things come to mind. The school nurse would be based at the school. So if there was an emergency, you need someone on site to be able to handle that. Also, if you took a certain population of students and moved them elsewhere, it has to you have to make sure that everyone's needs are being met, whether that's an IEP or a 504. Students have to be able to get their services. So, and it wouldn't be fair to take students who do not require those services and have them be the ones that move. So those are just a couple other things that come to mind when you're talking about that option.
Thank you, Brianna. Any other thoughts?
I just wanted to say one more thing. Just so I don't seem like a negative Nelly, Peter. I think one of the options that is, that we haven't talked about, if you do a renovation project and you're living in it, is that, Scott's point was, you build the new section of the addition and then you move kids into that and it's programmatic. Well, if you're facing a hall school, the front of the building, and you are going to do the work on the right side of the building, which is the art. There's an art classroom over there. There's a couple special education classrooms over there. The TV studios over there. If you were going to renovate, those spaces couldn't be used, obviously. But then we would have to internally figure out where, do we have to temporarily turn the library into an art room? Or, you'd have to do that internally. Where's there an open space? Someone might be on a cart constantly. So there's an open 5th grade classroom for 35 minutes from 1 o'clock to 1:35. You're teaching in that classroom during that time. And I'm sure Brianna and Ann and any teacher in the room is cringing right now when I'm saying this, because it's really hard to do, especially over a long period of time. But basically you figure out where those open spaces are and you use those spaces, you just schedule those spaces to cover, but it's all over the place. Obviously the cafeteria is not used all day long. It's used for your lunch waves. During the time where it's not being used, it would become a space that you would use for a classroom. That's the flexibility that you build in and is reasonable, and you keep your kids in your building. That's the scheduling side that we would accommodate to, that would be manageable. But we'd have to look at the schedule and see how many spaces are, and, look at who's going to be in the new portion of, who would be in the addition. But again, that's the flexibility I think that, I would expect we would take over as on the Board of Ed side.
Thank you, Phil.
I was an enrichment teacher when they renovated 3 schools. So I moved 11 times within that. I think it was like a 2-year project, because I was one of those people that didn't have to stay put. So that's a supplemental person. That's not a classroom person, but that's what it sort of looks like.
Prime example, Ann. Thank you.
Any other ideas before we leave this item for swing space options? Okay, hearing none. Let's move on to item B. Proposal for phase 1 site environmental analysis for a potential school site. So this phase 1 site environmental analysis is a requirement of the application for grant funding. If we were to go with, well, I think either project, a new site or the renovation site, we need to file the phase 1 environmental. And so we have asked in our previous meeting, I don't know if it was our last meeting or the one before, we had asked Colliers to solicit phase 1 environmental assessments proposals for us to look at. And Scott from Colliers has received 2 proposals. Those were emailed to the committee. And this is an item that we'd like to vote on tonight. And I will read you a motion that I'd like to make, and then we'll have a discussion about it. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the low bidder out of the 2 proposals for Eagle Environmental Incorporated. The proposals dated 6/20/2022 to provide phase 1 environmental site assessments at 2 locations. 1 for a new site pending owner approval, and 1 for the existing Hall School site in the total amount of $5,000. So I have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Thank you, Justin. All right, discussion. Ralph, you want to start us off?
Okay, I hope that everyone understands that these proposals should stay within the committee and not be released anywhere, because there's identifying information in those proposals that should not be public knowledge at this point in time.
Thank you, Ralph. Go ahead, Justin.
I just have a question of, were they sent to the whole committee? I know I saw or read in one of the minutes, or I forget where, but just making sure that I've seen the proposals and what I think they are.
Was it sent to the entire committee? Is that the question? Yes, they were.
Okay.
Catherine, one comment question I have, and I want to make sure I'm clear on this. And I think Scott was the one that said it. We would, even with landowner approval, private site we're discussing right now, you would not do the phase 1 until you saw the appraisal. Am I thinking about that properly?
Well, at this point, I'm concerned about the timeline for the appraisal. It's going to take 3 weeks to get the phase 1 done. if we have any sense of confidence that we think we're going to be able to, come to an agreement on an appraisal for the land, I would say move forward with at least the 2,500 on the proposed site. I mean, we do have to spend some money to move this project forward. If in fact they found something environmentally that was prohibitive, then that would immediately kill the deal and we'd know where our direction was. Again, we're trying to get to a point where we have confidence that we have two viable options. So I would encourage at this point, even though it might be prudent to be a little bit cautious with this at this point, I think we've lost so much time. I would encourage the committee to move this forward.
Thank you.
Justin, your hand is up.
So just thinking out loud here, even if this committee was dead set on doing a renovation at this point, we still have to show the OSCGR that it's cheaper to do this, or a renovation would be cheaper than building a brand new school. Would we have to go through a similar process no matter what? We probably wouldn't have to pay for this, but we would have to somehow prove that a new school would be more. So I guess my question is, would we have to still do something similar to this if we were only planning on doing a renovation?
Well, I think if there, and that would be a discussion with the state. If there were no other options, if there was absolutely no land available, then we would have to go back to them and say, we've exhausted all opportunities to build a new school. Our only option is to build, to renovate. And again, I think we need to understand that, a renovation option comes with some constraints, potentially as far as future expansion, in other things. So, I do think, again, you owe it to the public. I think we do have at the moment until something proves otherwise, either in the deed language that the state may or may not be able to digest, or if we find something or cannot come to an agreement on the land purchase, and would have to look at another opportunity for land. I think we really do need to continue to look at both options.
So I think, Justin, does that answer your question? Because I think the way I heard your question, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're asking if we would need to do these environmental phase one assessments on the properties if we go to a new school. Is that what you're asking?
Well, maybe I'm incorrect in what I'm looking at on the agenda. When we are talking about our proposal, are we doing the environmental for both sites or just the new site?
It's for both sites.
Okay.
If there are proposals for both sites, you could potentially hold off for a short period of time. But again, if we're strongly considering the existing site, part of the proposal, not only identifying potential environmental concerns, but also having this consultant put a rough order of magnitude on what remediation costs may be. So again, when we're trying to get a firm number, as firm as we can to the public in evaluating cost for option A, cost for option B, I think it's prudent to understand, environmental issues. If you get into an environmental issue, those can be quite costly within a site. So I think it's prudent to understand if we have either of those conditions at either of the sites.
Right, and this is part of the due diligence of, let's find out, are there any environmental concerns at Hall or at the new site? Let's identify those, let's estimate them and put them in our estimate when we tally up all the costs for renovation versus a new site. Ralph, I see your hand up.
Well, make sure. Okay, phase one environmental. Question for Scott. If we're looking at a new site, we're just looking at evaluating the land, correct? If we're looking at doing a reconfiguration of Hall School, doing this same assessment, are we just looking at the land?
Yes.
Or are we comparing apples and oranges here?
It's just, unmute, Scott.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm muted. No, we would be looking at the land only at this point. There are environmental reports that exist. We have a lot of empirical information on other projects as far as renovation and, buildings of this era in general of this era of what we get into. So we do have some historical square footage costs. Now, if this committee so chose, you could do a full environmental analysis in testing of the existing building, but you're talking about expending a significant amount of dollars. So
Okay.
it's a matter of how much money do you want to spend to gather the due diligence information. At this point, for comparison purposes, I would recommend at this point just going with current data that we're seeing within the industry for abatement of existing building itself. But site is an unknown. You do have a report of what is in the existing building that Phil has.
Okay, you didn't really answer my question. And you went on to other things that
He did.
We're not-
I heard it. He said land only.
okay.
Yeah.
So we have a site that's been used as a school for almost a century with no known site environmental issues.
Mhm.
Why would we have to spend money to evaluate that site? The land.
Because for the state to fund a project, you're going to have to file an SCGO 53 for either site. So once you choose an option, and you will have to file this paperwork, and part of that paperwork is the site forces you to do your diligence and do a site evaluation, a phase 1 site evaluation. So
They won't waive it.
No,
Because to me, it seems like a reasonable request to ask for a waiver on that for the Hall School property.
they will not.
I know, Phil, I'm annoying you, but
You're not. I'm laughing because when I had to do the oil tank, Ralph, I had to fill out paperwork that talked about Wi-Fi capability to the oil tank. There are some forms that you just have to fill out for the state that are just baffling. And this is, one of those examples. It's a school already, but it's a requirement that you have to do to get that reimbursement.
makes you wonder why you go for reimbursement sometimes.
Well, if
Because we have
you
no
live
money.
if you live in Greenwich, you don't have to.
Hang on, Peter. I'm going to go to Ann next.
Sure.
Ann?
While we're taking a look at the environmentals, would it be possible to pull that data on the environmentals within Hall School so that we're kind of seeing the whole picture? We're seeing what's in the land and in addition to what's in the building, at least the data that we have so far.
I'll let Scott answer that, but I'm not sure that piece of it is required in this particular next step for the.
Well, it would be for our information. If we even had an idea that we were going to have some large expenses to remediate environmental issues, that's something to think about.
Yeah,
It might be risky.
I believe we already do have an abatement identification plan that maybe Phil can speak to that.
You have a management plan that looks at any of the concerns, and there's a number of things that are most likely concealed behind walls that aren't any type of a concern until you start renovating. So there is a management plan that gets reviewed, I believe, on a yearly basis, takes a look at any potential materials if they were exposed and addresses them to meet Department of Health standards. So, but once you start renovating and knocking walls down, old pipes, pipe fittings, things that are hidden, those typically could be damp proofing on the old masonry walls, can have certain issues. So again, nothing exists there right now from an understanding that is a health concern. But once you start renovating, you're going to expose those materials.
Thank you.
And that will come further down in the process. So is there any other discussion on this item? We have a motion on the table. I can repeat the motion, Peter.
Yeah, before I can vote on this, I need to understand something better. I'm confused about the sequence of the tasks here. Scott, wouldn't the phase 1 environmental study potentially influence the appraisal of the site? And if so, shouldn't that precede the appraisal? Or am I not understanding this correctly?
No, I mean, I think at this point, I'm suggesting you do them in conjunction. I think the phase one environmental, if it showed a significant concern or identified something, that then could be just as if you had a home inspection. And once you had your appraisal, you could take that into account as part of your negotiations. If in fact it was, something that you felt was palatable that could easily be cleaned up, but there was certainly a value to it, that could be used in negotiations once you had your appraisal. So again, to move this forward, I think we really need to do these. I know Mike is working on getting the appraisal finalized, and I would strongly suggest starting the phase one environmental as well.
So I'm not sure. I think we lost. Am I missing? Did we lose Mike?
Yes, a while ago. Yep.
All right. So
You still have a quorum now.
Okay. 4, 6. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll repeat the motion on the floor. I'd like to make a motion to approve the Eagle Environmental Inc. proposal dated 6/20/2022 to provide phase one environmental site assessments, also known as ESAs, at 2 locations, one for a new site pending owner approval and one for the existing Hall School site in the total amount of $5,000. So shall we take a vote? Or actually we need a second?
You already had it, I thought.
I don't remember getting a second from anybody.
I seconded it for discussion purposes.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Did.
Okay, so we had our discussion, and shall we take a vote? I'm going to do a roll call vote. Brianna?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Ralph?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Erica?
Erica abstains.
Okay, motion carries. Next item on the agenda, Erica, you're up again. This one is meeting format regarding hybrid or fully remote. We have talked about this in a few meetings. I think the last meeting we had briefly discussed it, and that's why it's on the agenda for tonight. I think this one is basically, shall we continue with our hybrid format or shall we go fully remote?
So I'll speak to that first. I don't know if Erica's in a position to do that. I'm going to tell you, I spent about an additional hour in my day today just to set up a meeting, and I had one person in the room. It's the first person we've had in the room in several meetings. I think in total of all of our hybrid meetings, we've had a total of 2 people outside of Erica and myself. And so my suggestion would be that we go back to fully remote because obviously for the committee, it's convenient. It's still accessible to the public, with the caveat that if we are going to do something, and I don't want to use the word important because our each meeting is important. We're making progress. But if we're going to do something that's public related, that maybe that we do want to open that up to in person and do in-person presentations and have the board, the committee present on site during those presentations. So when we start talking about public presentations, that we have our folks on site and not via Zoom. From the standpoint of right now, we're saving some funds for mileage for Colliers because Scott can do this from the luxury of his beautiful office there, quotes and air quotes. But just from the standpoint of ease, if we had a bunch of people showing up in person, I'd say, let's keep the hybrid going. We don't. And so that's where I think Erica would second that from the standpoint of, and not on a formal motion, but it's just what we've seen.
Yeah, if I can, Catherine.
Yes, go ahead, Erica.
I echo Phil's sentiments. If I thought there was a commitment from the committee to be in person, I think we should be in person. I've said that before, but otherwise I suggest we go back to fully remote. Again, agreeing with Phil's caveat that some of the more public input heavy meetings that we try to attend in person. And at that point, I think it would be important that our entire committee make a commitment to be in person.
Thank you, Erica. Ralph, did you have your hand up?
I did. If today's weather is any indication, I think for some of us, it might be better to continue with remote. I'm sitting in a nice air-conditioned basement. I love it. I don't want to be in a hot room with a whole bunch of people. No offense, anyone. I didn't mean it that way. I'd much rather prefer fully in person, but I'm not sure we're ready for that. And I just as soon enjoy the air conditioning while we're dealing with the heat.
If I can, we do have resources downstairs and we're working on upgrades to the Wi-Fi that will help. We certainly weren't set up for this before, but we all do a lot of things in our normal life in person. I think the public, we've heard from them, although they're not coming to our meetings, have heard why aren't we meeting in person, which is why I say, as long as there's a commitment from there, I think we can sit in whatever room needs to be to do the work we need to do.
Thank you. And I think as long as we have the flexibility to do an in-person meeting, even though we vote on a fully remote moving forward, if we have that flexibility to make a change for a specific meeting, I'm all for continuing with remote as well.
Catherine, what if we took it on a meeting by meeting basis? And each meeting we determine at the end of the meeting how we were going to treat the next meeting. The decision ultimately is up to each commission.
I mean, that's an option. It seems, I'd almost like to set something up as a, like, let's vote on what we prefer and then make the exception. Instead of doing it every meeting, it's an exception or it's a decision at every meeting. I don't know. That's just my thought.
What would that look like, Catherine?
Well, if we were to vote fully remote, we just continue fully remote. And if we know that we're going to have a presentation, for example, community outreach, or if we want to share our updates with some visuals, you know, maybe we do that as an exception and do that one in person. I don't know. What are you guys seeing from the other committees?
I only have one current committee at the moment, Catherine, that meets in person. All of my other projects are all still back to doing remote.
How about you, Erica?
I think the reality in town, if you take the exception of last night's planning and zoning hearing, the Board of Selectmen has been the only board that's been meeting in person.
Thank you. Ralph, did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to make reference to last night's meeting at the Hall School. It was, thankfully, I was able to sit on the floor where it was cooler. But for now, I mean, to try and decide meeting by meeting, we'd almost have to know our full agenda for the next meeting. And we don't always know that until a few days before the meeting. So I just assume continue this way unless we're certain we've got something that really needs to be in person.
Okay, do we need to make a motion? To continue our SBC meetings in a fully remote fashion with the flexibility to have in-person meetings as needed.
I will move that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Second, thank you. Okay, let's try doing an overall vote, and then if we get if we have to do a roll call vote, I will. So all in favor of continuing or implementing the fully remote meetings moving forward with the flexibility to do an in-person meeting as needed. Say aye.
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 Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. That was our last new business item. So let's jump to future business. Does anybody have any specific items they want to put on the next agenda?
When is our next meeting?
Our next meeting is August.
3rd.
2 weeks from today, 2 weeks from today.
I don't think we'll have much to add to the agenda really in 2 weeks.
I was gonna say the same thing, Ralph. I think from the standpoint of what we're waiting on right now between a phase one and an appraisal, right? Those are two of our big priorities for this committee. We're not gonna have that information in 2 weeks, I don't think.
No.
And so, oops, Scott, you came off. Does it make sense to not have that first meeting in August?
Well, completely selfishly, and I was prepared to join as long as it was a remote meeting. I will be on vacation in 2 weeks. But I'm happy to join, remotely. But, I think we could wait until next week and see if the appraisal or any other information was coming, if that at least came in, potentially have a quick meeting, but I'll leave it up to the committee. I'll do whatever, I will make myself available to try and move the project forward if there's meaningful information that we can bring to the table.
Well, for those in attendance tonight, is there a conflict for August 3rd?
I have the potential to leave early for a vacation that starts the next day if I don't meet. But
I mean, I suppose we could throw it on the table if people want to cancel the meeting.
Catherine, to Scott's point, can we just put a date on it and say, if we don't have either an appraisal or phase one information by July 29th, that we're not going to meet on August 3rd? That way gives some people time just to know that we're not going to meet. Does that make sense?
I will say that the team estimated it would take 3 weeks to get the phase ones completed. So you will not have phase one information if we, notify them, get it awarded, a PO awarded next Monday. We're looking at 3 weeks out on the phase ones.
And nor will we have the appraisal either, because they also told us 3 weeks.
Cancel it.
Ralph?
Yeah, just anecdotally, I had a conversation with a realtor the other day to see if he knew of an appraiser, but I didn't realize that Mike had already moved forward on that. Judging from the environment out there for appraisers, I would not expect anything until our second meeting next month at best, because they're dying, retiring, or too busy. That seems to be a common theme with appraisers.
Ralph, if I may, I will, and for the committee, reiterate that we do or will need a second appraisal if we go forward with a land purchase. So trying to identify a second appraisal is still a critical path item.
Right.
Okay, I will pursue that with the realtor I was talking with.
Yep, and I believe
see-
Mike, I believe Mike is doing that. So if you want to connect with him.
Well, I can still harass him. I'm good at that.
So I don't know if this is the spot to bring it up, but the items for future agenda, which is what we're talking about, can we make a vote to cancel the next meeting, or do we just play it by ear based on the fact that there are no agenda items? It's a procedural question for either Phil or Erica.
You don't need to vote on it. You can just, you're hearing from folks saying we don't really have any agenda items. We're not going to have the information, and we can just send out the notification canceling the meeting.
Is everybody, go ahead, Ann.
One thing to add to future agenda items is updates on the task force for the presentation to the public. in the future. I don't think we'll have anything to report in 2 weeks yet, but, you know, moving forward to maybe that next meeting.
Thank you. So is everyone in agreement for canceling the August 3rd meeting, and then our next meeting would be August 17th? I believe that date's right. August 17th is our next one.
Why don't you wait till the Friday before and see where things stand? And, you know, leave it on the calendar. And if we cancel it on Friday before, we cancel it.
I tend to agree with Ralph. Right now, we know there's probably nothing going to be on the agenda. If something pops up, we have the ability to keep the meeting.
Yeah.
In that Friday, you'll know, Catherine,
Yeah.
as our chair, if there just isn't enough an agenda,
Okay.
and just put out the cancellation.
All right. Sounds good. So moving on, next item is present to speak. So if you are on the call, just unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Hi, Nicholas Tella, 49 Myrtle.
Hi, Nicholas.
Sorry, I got a little worked up there. So I'll try to stay calm and cool. But what you guys just did as far as taking the convenience of being at home kind of as a veteran and having guys in the Middle East right now, you're sitting there complaining about 82 degrees. You got guys right now, 100 and something degrees, 60 pounds of gear, and you can't suck it up and go in. So kind of pissed me off there. But getting to my other notes here, I think Scott did a great job clarifying the difference between emergency and relief shelters. Identifying that early could have saved us a headache down the road. Again, notes on, I don't get where we are on the building. Are we building a brand new school or adding on to hall, keeping 55% of the school? Is gutting the school and updating them an option, which I personally would like to see. Kind of confused where you guys, it's all over the place here. So I don't know where you guys are on that. Looking into the school center situation, the way it's being said, it makes it seem like center's too small for the kids that would be in the elementary school. I heard there's potentially 22 classrooms in this meeting. So that there was 203 students in 2021, which I find it difficult to believe that, but say even it jumped to 300, you still have 20 plus classrooms. So I understand why a pod or another location would be needed. Again, maybe that's a misunderstanding because I don't know what you guys are doing. Building a new school, redoing it, it's conversations all over the place. We need to look at adding people from the community onto this committee to get a fair representation of the people in town, not just having employees. There is naturally a bias as members may not, well, maybe subconsciously unable to give a proper pushback when necessary. HVAC did not have proper maintenance at the library. Now the town just found out that they have an $18,000 potential expense on their hands with the tanks. How do we know the new school would be maintained, especially when center and hall weren't? Again, I just want to close. Really pissed off that you guys, the convenience of 82 degrees is a factor. So thank you.
So we're still in public to speak. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Again, just unmute yourself and state your name, please. Okay, one more time. Any public to speak? If you'd like to say anything, just unmute yourself. Okay, hearing none. The next item is adjournment. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. It is now 8:30 p.m. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Night.
Great
Good night,
weekend.